had this week an unexpected guest that was coming all the way from Hawaii. And he is really on the front lines of this battle in Hawaii, which is really a unique situation. I went through all his credentials, and he said, how about if I just introduce myself? So we're going to let, do you want to come up? This is Dr. Peng. And I do have to say, too, I was reading something, an article somewhere, and there was a quote from Dr. Peng. It was in Scientific America, and they were quoting Dr. Peng in there. So anyway, here he is.
How long? Look, thank you. Thank you. I have this PowerPoint, but it's too late in the day for the PowerPoint. And my wife said, if you need a PowerPoint, it's not that important to say. So let's just lay it on the table and be quite frank. I have a couple obligations here. I have to describe what's going on health-wise in Hawaii. Then I'm going to have to tell you about this little bit new approach that we're thinking about. Some people disagree violently with it. Some people love it. So I just want to put it on your radar screen. The previous speakers, I'm going to just assume that, because I agree with them, I'm going to assume we get the message that one of these pesticides has gone all over the place. It's in your water, it's in your honey, it's in your food, it's in your air. And yes, the exposure of humans is fantastic. Okay. Next, that they tried to make. The effects on the ecology, whether it be native species or other plants or human health, is quite unknown. Now you might say, wait, these guys said it was bad. I claim it's unknown because you actually don't know how bad, okay? And every day we discover new syndromes, so it's quite unknown, okay? Next, now I introduce myself. I'm a physician. I graduated from Princeton University in chemistry. I have an MD degree from Tulane University and public health. I was a consultant for the World Health Organization for, 20 years, testing drugs and vaccines in the third world. And also I worked for the Walter Reed Institute of Research. Since then, my folks were getting old. I went back to Hawaii to take care of them since the year 2000. Since then, I've heard about this issue of GMOs and the associated pesticides. And I got quite concerned because that's not how I was taught to do human experiments. So let's talk about the third factor of human experimentation, right? Humans, yep. You have exposure of some chemical or some intervention, pesticides. And then you don't really know all you need to know about those chemicals. In this case, glyphosate. In Hawaii, believe me, we got more than glyphosate. We have 85 plus chemicals used in high amounts, year-round, all of them pharmacologically active. This is not beef stew. They're intended to kill or enhance killing. This is not beef stew again. So every time I say, wait, we got 85 chemicals, people say, well, aren't you worried about the chemicals of beef stew? Beef stew is not pharmacologically active, killing or intending to kill. So I'm only going to talk about human health. I'm concerned about the environment, yes, and the native species, yes, Hawaii has plenty, but I only know the principles of human health and how we do experimentations. The next thing I should say, because we've been filming this, I speak as a private citizen. I do work for a government agency, but I get yelled at because they don't agree with my position. You have to ask them what is their position, because it changes every other day. Now, I would like to make the case, and I will describe what's going on in Hawaii as an example. But first, I would like to make the case that open air use of chemicals, or in this case, pesticides, is a human experimentation. And you will hear a lot of people say, yeah. They said, we're not guinea pigs. So that's like an experiment. Yes, but you have to go beyond the gut reaction that, yeah, you're experimenting on us, please stop. Nope. You have to first say why. And we've been over this. Humans, yes, they're exposed, yes. and the agents they're exposed to, it's quite unknown. Yes. So it is human experimentation. Now, what do we do for that? Well, my area was clinical trials. Well, what's a clinical trial? Well, you get these people coming in, and they got some disease, and you tell them, you know, I got this new drug here. Would you like to try it? Well, how do you do that? You just give it to them? You sneak it in their water, like glyphosate's coming down in our water, raining upon us in our air? No, it's called informed consent. And ever since the Nuremberg trials, the Helsinki Accord, informed consent. You sit them down and you say, let me give you the informed part. Here's a chemical. This is what we know about it based on animal studies. This is the possible side effects. This is the possible benefits. And not just, you have to tell them the direct and indirect. For example, an indirect benefit might be save the world. We need GMO crops. We need pesticides to save the world, feed the world. That may or may not be real, but it's an indirect benefit. But in the clinical trial, you have to tell them, you will advance science. We will learn about this vaccine. I changed from drug to vaccine. You will learn about this vaccine, but for you, here are the possible side effects and benefits. For you, you have to do that. You have to tell them what else. You can quit the study at any time. So that's the informed part. And by the way, I will take care of you, and I'm going to check you once a month. And the minute you have this and this, then you have to tell them, oh, by the way, there were 1,000 guys previously tested, okay? And this is what we saw, and you're number 1,001. Now comes the consent. Do you freely consent to participate? Consent means, yes, I'll come in, but I can quit at any time, right, Doc? Yes, that's right. And there's no enticement or coercion. Okay, I'm telling you, I think aerosolized use of chemicals, pesticides, the airborne part, we've been enticed, we've been coerced in Maui. We voted on this, we won the majority. It's not even informed consent of the individual. We have the majority of individuals said no. Was there enticement and coercion? Damn right there was. Well, what form was it? They said, do you know we have an industry here already, and it contributes this much to your Maui economy. Furthermore, your uncle, he's going to lose his job. He works for the company. That is enticement and coercion in the most grotesque form. Not only did the University of Hawaii Medical School make these statements, but they went and quantified it for us, $700 million per year. So what happened to the principles of the Nuremberg trial, the Helsinki Accord, et cetera? So I claim, follow the rules of human experimentation. We know how to do it, informed consent. Immediately, our own lawyers from our own side said, nope, you are extrapolating beyond belief, Dr. Peng. You do your little clinical trial on 12 people, okay, and now that's not a little group. They are releasing chemicals onto the communities. He said, yeah, so what? I think the community is nothing more than a bunch of individuals, and each of those needs individual informed consent. I said, well, I don't know about that. Next issue. You took international rules, Nuremberg and Helsinki Accord, but the US doesn't follow international rules, or we do when we choose to, although the US led the Nuremberg arguments, right? And finally, they said, there's something wrong with this argument. You got these clinical patients here, you're treating patients, and so they get the benefit and the side effects. In the real world of pesticides, you're killing the plant pest. And the humans happen to breed the stuff, so the humans get the downside of it, but it's for the sake of plants, for the sake of the plant pest. Well, I'm sorry, but that's the way I felt. And I thought that was good enough. Well, it wasn't good enough. So I quickly went to the literature. And in 1994, the US Congress had a hearing on the Cold War experiments done between 1950 and 1962. It only came to light in 1993. And Clinton formed a group to say, what the heck happened? It turned out that the US military released over hundreds of communities, 16 major ones in US and Canada, biologics, chemicals, and radiologics. These were all condemned, and they said, all of these community people that were exposed, you need to get individual informed consent. And General Creasy said, you're kidding me. There's 1 million guys downwind, so therefore I didn't do it. They said, General Creasy, that's your problem. Just because you couldn't do it, you went and did it in secret. So, once again, on my individual clinical trial, maybe 10 guys said, I want your experimental drug. 2 people say no. Well, these 10 guys get it, and 2 people don't. What's the problem with aerosolized pesticide drift on Maui? We won for a moratorium till the stuff is studied. Yep, what's the problem? Well, let's say we didn't have a majority. Let's say 98% say, we don't mind it. Our economy depends on it. But 2% says no. If you cannot protect the 2%, the answer is no. Okay? When the military released over 3 days their agent, I don't even know what it's for. They didn't get informed consent. They said all the people in St. Louis, Minnesota, would have run away for those 3 days. Now we talk about Hawaii. We use pesticides, massive amounts, including glyphosate, repeatedly, year-round, sprayed sometimes twice a day. So when these 2 people who said, I said no, you cannot protect them, you can't move them out, the answer is simply no. Oh, gee, Dr. Peng, you're really getting off base here. Why don't you show us that you did it? You want me to show you what I did? We were in Bangladesh. We had a vaccine for one of their diseases, Shigella. And I thought it was good. I was trying to do them, good things. And so I went to the village and I said, how many of you are willing to volunteer for the vaccine? 98%. 2%, 2 people said no. The village headman comes and says, well, that's only 2 people. Let's just give it. It's a live vaccine. Once I release it to the village, those 2 are going to get it because it's live. The answer is no. So I abided by the rules, and I don't like a double standard where I abide by the rules, and the corporations, for whatever reason, money, they just get to use it. Now I move specifically to Hawaii. Bear with me. You will learn the Hawaii situation. Why? Because suppose we decide one day that this does need informed consent of everybody exposed. Let's say that day is in the future. Not only will you say, hey, that glyphosate stuff, you guys should never have started it, so stop. The future chemicals coming, trust me, when glyphosate fails, you should see what's coming down the line. You don't get to use it if a couple guys say no and you can't protect them. So let's pretend I got this new chemicals, or let's pretend right now in Hawaii, I go to all of you, you're gonna get exposed, and I'm giving you informed consent. Well, what's the information part? Now this part is true. Okay, we're about to expose you to some chemicals here. Which ones? In Hawaii, we're using 85 plus chemicals, pesticides and enhancers on populations, 85 plus. It is a medical principle. When you combine 2 chemicals, you treat it like a new entity. I had to do that. I combined chloroquine and erythromycin for malaria, and I started with a combination as though there's new toxicity. And I don't mean a chemical bond, I mean giving it at the same time. So, with 85 chemicals, how many possible combinations are there? Pairwise, triplicate, 1 trillion times 1 trillion. How many have we tested? This is a leading issue with the National Academy of Science. The combination effect of chemicals is the main toxicity facing the widespread use of chemicals now. How many have we tested? Well, we tested a few, pairwise. Dr. Seralini tested a few. What did he see? Synergistic toxicity, nucleic acid toxicity. He just looked at 2. Now you got 1 trillion left. Whoa. So you really don't know. This is informed consent. I don't know. You're exposed to some soup. Well, no harm has been shown. That's what the industry keeps saying. That's why it's an experiment, my friend, because we don't know. And I just told you, I don't know. I'm about to ask you to give your consent soon, but we don't know. Your next question is, well, the stuff I get, is it like irreversible? I don't know. I don't know what it is, and I can't tell you if it's irreversible. Well, could it be gene toxicity, which translates as cancer, birth defect, sterility? Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. Okay, so let's be honest. We don't know. Well, okay, next thing is exposure. How far do you think it drifts? According to the Cold War experiments where they released one chemical, it drifted 100 miles in 3 days. Now, it will drift as long as the half-life of the drug persists. Some of these chemicals are 2 weeks half-life or 2 months half-life, depending which one you choose. Well, how long does it last? What's a half-life? Generally, in medicine, we use 5 half-lives. So 2 weeks is 10 weeks. 2 months is 10 months. That's how long it persists and can drift. So how many people do I have to talk to? Really? Conservatively? Because we know from the Cold War experiments, 100 miles. These guys are proposing, we just passed or approaching, quarter-mile buffer zone. It's 100 miles. I got to go get informed consent from 100 miles. Well, we can't do that. Well, the people who say no, can you separate them? No. So then I guess you just can't do it. I don't like the double standard. I didn't do that for a live vaccine. And you can't do this when there's so many pesticides. Okay, informed consent. Carry on, Dr. Peng. Well, are you going to monitor us for illness? It's never been done before, but I guess I could. Well, how long are you going to monitor us? You know that chronic stuff that appears like 10 years later, or when I'm like sterile? Are you going to monitor us that long? I guess I could. Could you fix it if it's something broken? I don't know. I don't know who pays for chronic insidious illnesses or cancer. Well, who's going to take care of us if we get side effects? Hey, who's going to prove it's a side effect? You know how hard it is to prove a side effect? Very difficult. But maybe we can take care of this. So that's the informed part. Of course, they want to say, has anyone done this before? 85 chemicals? Well, let's see. Somebody did 45. The apple growers are using 45, upstate New York. How many combinations with 45? Oh, I think it's 30 trillion. But with 85, there's a trillion. Don't quote me on the apples. You can quote me on the 85. Next, comes time for the consent, right? The consent. I gave you all the information I know. Now I need your consent. Well, let's see. Is there enticement or coercion? Did somebody tell you that your uncle's going to lose this job? Yeah, they told us that. That's automatic coercion. These guys never should have come out in the first place. But now that they got your uncle working for them, that's threatening. I'm going to have to make a statement that your uncle will be paid some salary for doing something, so there's no form of coercion. It's almost impossible to address now. What about enticement? Contributions to our local economy. I'm going to have to get some guarantee that since you guys started unethically, you being the corporations, I want to guarantee that this economy of this island doesn't change when enough guys say no and you have to shut down. Once you get them started, addicted to money, you cannot help but entice and coerce. And then, Dr. Peng, can I leave at any time? Yes, you can. Well, are you going to tell me when new chemicals are added, like dicamba or something, or new combinations are made? Yes, I'll try to. And then you can quit at any time. Hey, I can't just leave. You mean you can shut down the thing at any one time? Yeah, you can. So you see, this is individual rights. This is one of the highest order rights ever existed based on the Nuremberg trial. The right not to be experimented on without informed consent. So this has to do with gun rights. One more thing, and I will leave you alone. I was talking about individual rights, not to be experimented on without informed consent. And some of our own side said, hey, next thing you'll be asking for gun rights. Wait a minute. There's all kinds of levels of rights, aren't there? Well, there are. I was working in a refugee camp, testing drugs and vaccines on the refugee camp on the Burmese-Thai border. These are refugees. They do not have the right to drive, own a car, own a gun, walk outside of the camp, but they cannot be experimented on without informed consent. Next, prisoners, Joliet prison, malaria studies. The prisoners don't have a lot of rights, but you cannot experiment on them without informed consent. And even if they said, I gave consent, that's coercion, tacit coercion, the warden was watching. And finally, you should know the capital punishment. Some of the drugs were torture. They were killing the person too slowly. Well, we need some new drugs. Well, why don't we just experiment on the guy? He's going to die anyway. You can't do that. Not even with capital punishment can you experiment on them. And if they do give informed consent, that's false. That's coercive and enticement. Okay, so anyway, I'm going to present this at different universities, and I was hoping, what? The physicians would get on board. I don't care about the physicians too much on this one. If it comes to individual informed consent, you will make the decision. Like the woman told me, I'm not coming in your cancer trial. I don't get to say, you're dumb, you're not scientific, oh, come on, I'm not going to be your doctor anymore. I respect your opinion. And of course, I kind of want to know. I just said, oh, by the way, you sign here, you're not in the trial. And the feds come to say, well, how many guys didn't enroll? You better have some. I said, yeah, and you know what she said? Can't you do it on somebody else first? And then if it works, no, not in my backyard. That's a legitimate argument not to be badgered by me. So I do respect. I don't have to prove harm. I can just say, I think these guys are earning too much money. I refuse. So we'll leave it at that and open to general questions. Thank you.
This is the general question portion. We're stuck with the mics up here. We're trying to record this, and the recording mics are here. So, if somebody has a question for Stephanie or Don or Dr. Peng, please raise your hand and blurt it out, and I'll try and reiterate it for the microphone, and then somebody will try and give you an answer. Yes.
How can glyphosate be disposed of?
How can glyphosate be disposed of? Come on, you.
Again, can be a very persistent chemical. Disposal can be by burning, or the best thing is to put it in take it to a company that will dispose of it, and that's usually by breaking it down and destroying it as a chemical compound. Now, when it's in residual in the soil, we have at least 6 groups now that I'm aware of that are developing biological cocktails that will break it down, and at least I've seen field trials of some of those, that they're able to completely degrade up to 9 or 10 pounds of glyphosate per acre per year. So that it may take 2 or 3 years or 4 years to get rid of it. Normally takes 6 organisms to break glyphosate down in the soil. There are a few organisms that can utilize it as a nutrient source. Fusarium is one of them. Of course, that's one of the reasons why it probably becomes a more serious pathogen for us. So it's not one that we would want to utilize without making sure that it doesn't have the pathogenic activity. Another one would be Acetobacter. There's some studies going on now. In fact, for animal use, I think they have clearance now to use sauerkraut juice, raw sauerkraut juice in animal feed. Tremendous idea. It's been going in the landfill for the last 40 or 50 years because it's a living entity, and FDA says you can't ship it around, it has to be disposed of. Well, that's Acetobacter, Lactobacillus, and Bifidobacteria, and a couple of other very beneficial organisms. And That's why it's such a good probiotic. But they can now add that to animal feed, and they get breakdown of the glyphosate in the rumen. So that some of those things are coming about. In the past, what I've recommended our growers in Indiana was use some gypsum or some lime in the furrow to keep it tied up as long as you can, rather than degrading it. But I think the new approach is much better, and where we have these cocktails, and I've asked the kind of the movers on the raw sauerkraut juice if they won't get out and use that as a soil application and see if it won't break it down in the soil. And I'd be really surprised if it doesn't. So that what we've thought of is kind of a legacy that we have to leave for a number of years may be pretty short if we can do that. At least there are a number of things. The cocktail approach is a very viable one. If you're using an already raw material that you're salvaging from the waste pile or the effluent, putting it to use, that's even better. And a lot of it's just looking outside the box on how to do that. Now, from a human standpoint, the fulvic acid and humic acid and clinoptilolite are the three best. Monica Kruger, Dr. Kruger at Leipzig University also had biochar. Biochar by itself didn't do anything, but in combination with sauerkraut juice worked very well, or the humic acid or clinoptilolite or the fulvic acid. Fulvic is the soluble part of the organic material. Humic is an insoluble part, but either one of them will entrap glyphosate and remove it from liver and kidney and a lot of those tissues. Prevent some of the problems with glyphosate is when it chelates with the minerals, and this Sri Lanka, especially with our high mineral water that the rice workers were drinking, it would chelate with the glyphosate and then plug up the kidney. That's a lot of what happens with sugarcane workers. They burn that, freeze up all of the minerals, and then they absorb that in the hot weather. And then you'll watch them as they're going through the field with a machete, and they'll chop off a little chunk of the stalk and chew on it for the sugar, give them something to do. Well, that's where the glyphosate has accumulated from the desiccation or the ripening phase. And so what you want to do then is block that chelation from going into the kidney, and that's what humic and fulvic acids do. They move it into the feces, so it's not going through the kidneys.
So, on the same lines as what she was saying of how to get rid of it, you mentioned the sauerkraut juice. So could you then ferment your compost? So by my compost pile, instead of just, could I ferment my compost and have the same effect?
So the question is, could I ferment my compost and have the same effect?
Composting hasn't had any effect on glyphosate because it usually doesn't contain any of the organisms that will break it down.
I said if you ferment the compost.
If you ferment with, if you have the organisms with it, then it would. The hang-up, glyphosate's a synthetic compound. And so there just hasn't been a lot of selective pressures for organisms to break it down. And it's the carbon phosphite lyase that is the most limiting in the environment. And that's one that acetic acid or acetobacter has, and a few others. If you have that in your compost, you'll probably break it down quite well.
It was carbon phosphate what?
Lyase,
GLY?
Lyase.
Thank you.
One of the things that we teach people is to the bacteria, the biology in your backyard. By taking leaf mold, which is ubiquitous biology in your backyard, and propagating it, you get huge numbers and quantities of local bacteria. And I'd suggest that this would be a source of the types of bacteria that may help chelate.
You know, they're just not readily available in most soils.
Next question. Yes.
I have a comment and a question. My comment is, it sounds like if you eat a little raw sauerkraut with every meal, it might be a good thing to help get glyphosate in your body on your food.
Well, my grandfather used to encourage that. And I was kind of like the sage tea that my grandmother gave me when I was about 10. She didn't even have to give it to us. She just had to threaten and we were cured.
And then when you had the slide up about the inflammatory bowel disease, you said there were two things that people could, I think you meant bifidobacterium and lactobacillus, but I'm not sure, to help cure inflammatory bowel disease. Two organisms, I think you said?
They're two organisms. They're different than the ones that are required for, excuse me, for type 1 diabetes. But Dana Stanley has taken kids that have been on almost from birth on insulin pumps, and in 3 days taken them off the pump, and they've never had to again, as long as they change their diet.
And do what? Change it how?
Get rid of glyphosate.
Oh. But you said there were two.
There are two organisms that are involved for most of the inflammatory bowel.
What are they?
I can't tell you what, I don't remember what those are. Dana Stanley is in that process now. She's a medical microbiologist. She's at Central Queensland University, and the only person that I know of that has really taxonomically dissected our gut microbiome. Most of the others will do recently the genetic analysis and that type of thing, but they really don't identify what those specific organisms are, and 90% you can't grow. What she's been able to do then is go into it and selectively pull those organisms, do the mouse studies, and then get into the human trials. So that she's done that for type 1 diabetes, for autism, and now on the various inflammatory bowel diseases. And I know there are two. I was with her here about 3 months ago, and she just had a big smile on her face. It's really coming good, but I don't remember what the organisms are. Again, it's by a colonoscopy that you make that modification. You clean out the GI tract, then you put the individuals on a high fermented diet, yogurt and kefir and kombucha and those things, so that it's receptive to start with, and then you do the implant for the specific organisms. A lot of doctors, and you can do it here as an experimental process, as a straight fecal transplant. And that'll be about 95% successful. The 5%, though, that can be a real downer, because that's also where your schizophrenia and your bipolar and your manic depressive, it's all from that gut dysbiosis that you see all of those problems. So you have to be careful. Work with an individual that had celiac disease. They wanted to remove 15 inches of his intestines because he was getting leaky gut and some other problems. And he said, "Can I try a fecal transplant?" Doctor said, "Well, I've never done that, but I would be willing to read up on it." He did, found a very compatible donor, and he said in 3 days I could eat everything that I hadn't been able to eat for 18 years. The problem is that he did that. And after, I guess it's been 8 or 9 years, he started getting cramping, started getting the bloating and the intestinal pain. Went back in, and the doctor said, well, you're not responding to your transplant. You need to either find another donor, or we're going to have to go on a lot of drugs for you. He tried another donor, and I tell you, I've never had someone so miserable to work with in my life. He was manic depressive. You never knew whether he was going to commit suicide that night or whatnot. They got him right back in. They flushed him out. Said he now owns stock in the castor oil company. But he was very happy for it. Went back to the original donor, which happened to be his wife, and been a year and a half now, and really working great. It's truly a miracle when you get that. Now, he changed his diet. He's on organic, and he watches very carefully even the organic that he eats. He said, don't want that experience again any time in my life. It's a horrible experience to go through.
Yes.
I hate to leave the microbiome because it's so fascinating, but I wanted to ask a question. I'm with the Organic Farming and Organic Landscaping Association here called Connecticut NOFA. And what you said about the longevity of glyphosate in the soil really sticks with me, of course. And it makes me, everybody asks me, how long does it take for a field to go from chemical to certified organic? And the rules say 3 years. You're saying that the glyphosate's going with a 22-year half-life. Have you guys already gone down the path of what would you recommend to the USDA? Or do we just want to commiserate about how bad that is?
No, I think that with organic, you also do a lot of biological farming. And so that even though it may be there, it's going to be much more innocuous. The more active phosphorus that you apply, the more higher probability of desorption and pulling it off. I think that's a situation. The biggest concern for organic that I have is the requirement of some countries now for certified glyphosate free. We're seeing that in Europe. So that it's really one step beyond organic. And that's a real threat to organic, as I see it. Because it's very difficult for us in Canada to come up with organic glyphosate free. We can do it, but it's going to be the small percentage of the fields. So that I think the bioremediation with these cocktails is going to be a real help for us in that area. Because you can shorten that from that 8 or 10 or 22-year half-life down to 2 or 3 years. In that transition period, take care of it. And I think that's the focus that we need to make. I think you also have to have practicality on it, so that we import, what, 2/3 of our, or 3/4 of our organic food. I'd still rather have organic with a little bit of contamination grown in the U.S. than in some of the foreign countries that we're importing from. I worked for 14 years in China, and know where the crop that's the most economic crop to grow is the one that gets all the human waste. And there are some other problems that come along with that, and some of those things. But that's what they have to work with, and they do the best they can. We do too. So if we can, I think there are approaches that we can use. Even with glyphosate, I think we need an immediate ban, and Howard Leaguer and I spent a couple of days in Washington contacting all of our congressmen all of the congressmen, Senate and House members that were involved in the science and technology committees, asking them for an immediate ban on glyphosate for desiccation purposes. It was the most ridiculous permission that could have ever been granted. We know all the problems. You don't have to start putting it right out just before you harvest your food and think that it's still safe. That's when all your levels go up in the accumulation. I think we need an immediate ban on that. I think we need a 3-year phase out so that there's an adaptive opportunity for our growers, rather than going cold turkey all the way. I think that'll bring it about, and I think we can move with it in that process if we would. Every one of them kind of smiled and said, "You think this is doable?" And I said, "I know it's doable if any of you want to go to a maternity ward and actually see what the birth defects look like for this next generation that we're producing."
Yes.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I've just been notified that if you would please go to the mic, and that'll give us the opportunity to record. Thank you so much. Give it a shot. Yes.
Okay. No, I think that sounds great, moving in the right direction. I just think there's an awful lot of misinformation about glyphosate out there, and I have the material data sheet from Monsanto, and there's lies here. Yeah. They just absolutely have lied to people, and if you use these as a reference source, you're going to totally not understand the problem. So I guess the elephant in the room is that, what can we do, and how do these corporations get away with pulling the wool over all our eyes like they have done and putting us all at risk?
What they've been able to do is claim proprietary right, so that even their own data, as you see with the release that Anthony Samsel's been able to make, and that of Monsanto's own studies. I showed you one of them. If you can look at the 1983 study, the same thing. There's no question, you don't need statistics to determine carcinogenicity when 23 of your test animals come down with malignant lymphomas and 0 of your controls are. How do you justify throwing out 9 of your animals out of 20 that died that you didn't account for, and all you said was that they died from unrelated causes to the test compound, but 0 in the control? And so they've been able to hide that, but the EPA has had it. They've betrayed the trust in that whole thing. But now that all of that information is coming out, then it just makes a mockery of the whole process. And that I would applaud Stephanie and Anthony for their courage in holding to that and getting a lot of that information out in the public that we wouldn't have otherwise.
I'm curious to hear from Dr. Peng about the solution that you said some people love or hate. And the second part of my question is, are there any petitions or anything that the people in Hawaii are partaking?
What was the first question? I didn't hear too much.
You said you had a solution that some people loved or hated that you were going to share.
Oh, yeah, that was the solution, to bring it to the framework of human experimentation. Now, in Hawaii, at least my island, we voted And there was a very sensible vote that they would stop the use of these pesticides by these companies. The companies can convert to organic if they want. We didn't do away with the company, but stop the use of these pesticides. So somebody please show us that it's safer than what we know now, which is zero. We won that by a majority, but it was overturned by the state courts, and then the feds, we appealed, and the feds overturned it. And the judge, I can almost quote her, "Gee, I wish I could do all that sexy stuff and science like you guys do, but I'm just doing it on process." The states don't have, the counties, Maui, don't have the right to set federal and state guidelines. Yeah, but the individuals do.
Any other questions? Please. Oh, have at it.
Thank you for everything that you've presented today, to all the experts here and all the energy that is in this room surrounding this topic. You had alluded to a potential solution that comes to the market in the near future that could be a replacement to Roundup. I'd be curious to hear a bit about that. And
It's acetic acid base, all natural base. A little different formulation, so it's much more active than the old calcium 5% or 20% acetic acid. So it's going to have to be handled a little more carefully. But it's all natural based mineral acetic acid mix, and really effective. I've seen a number of trials with it, and do everything that glyphosate will do. It's going to be a little bit more costly, so that it's, I think the first registration is for orchards and horticultural uses, parks and recreation. It's been commercialized in Australia for about 3 years. So they have a good track record there. I understand in the Philippines and Sri Lanka, several other countries have also approved it for use, so that hopefully we'll have it probably within 7 months, but at least in 13. It'll be a registered product for us here.
This sounds a little bit along the lines of an agricultural vinegar, or not?
Don't know who, it'll be an agricultural vendor, but I don't know exactly what the commercialization is focused on.
Thank you.
Okay.
Can I wrap up on that then? So that is an example of how we're going to get ourselves out of this mess, promoting the solutions of what can we do. And I wanted to tell these good people in this room that we are offering free scholarships for our organic land care training this year for Connecticut NOFA for the first time ever, thanks to a donor. So I can invite and host 100 people this year for our 4-day organic landscaping training. So if you know a landscaper, or if you want to help us reach out to landscapers, please let Jeff at Connecticut NOFA know, because we want to train people who manage land in the Connecticut region. So that's one solution we could bring to the table, and I appreciate what everybody else is bringing to the table.
And it's hard to just have one question. So I thank you before for talking to me about some of my other questions. I'm still curious about the Shikimati enzyme sequence and how it's the inhibiting some of the synthesis of hormones in the brain, like you were talking about the tryptophan, I was talking about melatonin, and the possible links between that and autism.
Okay, got the expert here.
Yeah, that is one of the first things that I looked at with respect to linking glyphosate to autism is the disruption of the shikimate pathway, which produces the aromatic amino acids. And those are precursors to serotonin, melatonin, dopamine, thyroid hormone, melanin, the skin tanning agent, and folate. So all of those are going to be deficient if you're being poisoned by glyphosate. And all of those are connected to autism. There's also, of course, the vitamin D deficiency problem, which is also linked to autism. The cytochrome P450 enzymes that get disrupted, those are needed to activate the vitamin D. And we have an absolute epidemic in vitamin D deficiency in our country right now. And there's also then the sleep disorder that we see as well, which is connected to autism and connected to melatonin deficiency, which comes from that shikimate pathway. So that pathway is incredibly important. This is where I feel very frustrated that Monsanto likes to argue that because our cells don't have that biological pathway, glyphosate is wonderful, it's harmless to us. But we depend upon our microbes to produce those products. Because we don't have that pathway, we can't make those products. And therefore, we can't make those neurotransmitters and all of those important active biological molecules if our microbes are not making those for us. So that's the short answer. Is that good?
Dr. Bonnie Kaplan at the University of Calgary has been studying the role of mineral nutrition in mental health, and she showed a picture of the whole laboratory full of mineral nutrient supplements that she has evaluated for mineral health. But she said only 2 of them worked. And said those are very, very effective. One of them is an Empower Plus. Don't remember who makes it. The Essential Minerals is another one that very effective for bipolar and for depression, a number of those diseases, and for autism. That one's by Hardy Chemicals. But the problem is that all of those would be produced normally with the functional GI tract. And that's where glyphosate just destroys that whole system. So.
Okay. According to my watch, which sometimes works, it's close to the end. I wanted to finish up by talking about some of the things that we can do. And some of these are pretty obvious, but it's worth talking about. The first thing is that we vote 3 times a day when we go to the grocery store, to the farm stand, whatever it is. And it's important to talk to the people that you buy your food from and understand, ask questions about its nutrient density, ask questions about where it came from, how far it traveled, how long has it been sitting there. Did they use a refractive index measurement to determine the quality? Things like this. So it's the conversation with the people that are providing us food that helps a great deal to bring awareness to our concerns and what they might want to be interested in. Large corporations have changed their practices because of what consumers think and do. Second thing is we still have politicians that listen to their constituents. Writing letters, calling, emails is a very, very important thing to do. Chris Murphy and Richard Blumenthal were invited to this event today, and they were interested in it, and they've reached out to us in a couple of different ways. I think that there was a large agenda in their forum today with the young people of our world speaking out, but the fact that they are interested is very important. So writing and contacting your representatives is still, believe it or not, is still something that we can do. There are a few organizations around that I wanted to mention. The first is a company called Advancing Eco-Agriculture. This is a company out of the Midwest. It was invented and run by a guy by the name of John Kemp, who I consider a great teacher, and I'd call him even a mentor for me, along with some of the other people in this room. And he has an amazing organization that evaluates the plants in to determine what minerals they need. And when Don talked about the need for molybdenum and manganese and boron and other things to facilitate photosynthesis, these are the kinds of things that farmers can do by evaluating their crop in real time and then supplying the minerals they need to advance the photosynthesis needed to create the sugars, and this also creates nutrient for the soil biology. John Kempf at Advancing Eco-Agriculture is a star, in my opinion, in this regard. We might get him here yet to have another conversation. The NOFA organizations, we've heard from NOFA Connecticut. There's also a NOFA Mass organization that is very active, and they offer a lot of programs that will provide information on these topics. We're getting more into the local people doing local things. There's also the Bionutrient Food Association, which is put together by a friend of mine, Dan Kittredge, thank you, and two of the representatives from the Connecticut chapter are here, Chris and Mark. I don't see Mark, but he's around here. There's Mark. And they are very active in education, in talking about these sorts of topics as well. And they are also a source of some minerals if you're interested in looking for those sorts of things. There was a farmer here, Brian O'Hara from Tobacco Road, who is, in my opinion, one of the leading farmers in Connecticut using the practices that we'll talk about, we have talked about, are out there. He grows amazing food. He does not use chemicals. He uses Korean natural farming. He uses minerals. He uses biologies that he has at his home and farm. An example of really good farming techniques here in Connecticut, and I'm sure there are others. Brian O'Hara, Tobacco Road Farm. There is a company called Acres USA. It's Acres USA that introduced me to both Don and John Kempf. Acres USA is an organization that's run out of the Midwest of the United States. They have a conference once a year, and at that conference you can hear speakers, the likes of Don Huber, maybe even Stephanie someday, I would imagine, and John Kempf and many others who will talk extensively on these subjects and provide information. Acres USA also has a very large book and video selection. If you are interested in these topics, just perusing their books and video selections may drain your pocketbook of a fair amount of money, but many of the resources there I've tremendously enjoyed, and it's one of the few places I know where there's a concerted amount of information that you can grab. There's another organization, and this is the Institute of Sustainable Nutrition. We've worked really hard in the last few years to put forth ideas, not only in the ideas of gardening, using products you make in your backyard for free, but also in the health, education, and in the kitchen medicine departments. We try very hard to put these ideas out there for people that are reachable, and when they leave our school, they can make products essentially for free to enhance the soil biology and the mineralization of their plants. I'd like to finish this up with a couple of things. First of all, if your name is on an email list, we're going to send out a package of information that we hope will provide further links. Don has provided us some links of information, and we have a couple of other pieces of information we'd like to put out there. Those that registered electronically and we have your email, you're going to get it. And if those who came in, as long as we can read your email address on the piece of paper that you left, we'll do our best to send that information out as well. We are taping this program. We have two different people who very kindly donated their time to tape this program. One person, Mark, is going to make this available on the Granby TV station. So this will be available to Granby residents, the whole thing, just by turning on your TV. It may be the first thing that I've heard of in a long time worth even having a TV. How many people don't have a TV? Nice. Yes. Nice. Yes, so we're going to make that available. We're going to try and get it on YouTube, And we're also want to make it available to any municipalities in Connecticut or Massachusetts. Anybody who knows of a municipality that would be interested in this information, we'd be more than interested in sharing that with you. Finally, thank you. Thank you all.